This video is about how to accept and even feel happy that you're weird. So what do I mean by that? It's no surprise that I find myself approaching the world around me rather differently as opposed to many of my peers. As a quick example, we call this idea in human interaction of social skills. I do not really care for social skills, at least growing up. I thought it was an endless popularity contest, right? It's an over-glorified, acceptable attempt at deceiving others to think that you are a virtuous human being, whether you actually are or not. That was my impression of the whole endeavor of social skills to begin with. And I didn't care about social skills at all. I really did not bother. It just isn't something that I care about. It's not something that I put in attention to develop. And I only started making sense of this about the end of last year, when my good friend defined social skills or empathy or whatever permutation of English words you want to use effectively as emotional context. And I started to look at social skills really as a tool to help me in my human interactions with others. I don't think social skills themselves are inherently a good thing. I just think it's a set of skills that you can use for good or for evil. If you use social skills for evil, we have a term for that, that's called emotional manipulation. But there's a reason why these manipulators are so successful in the first place. Anyway, that whole digression is to just illustrate how even though I'm supposed to know social skills as a now 29-year-old, I never really cared about it until, say, last year, which was when I turned 28. And that's quite different. At least most of my peers probably would care about social skills from a really young age. I mean, that's effectively why people get sucked into the popularity contest here and there, then they refine it and they start to make it work out for them later on. At least that's my view of what it means to develop social skills. Now, why do I say that? Well, that's because that's probably not the only area in which I find myself differing from others. I find myself differing from others in many areas. In the last video, I talked about how I do not really have conventional hobbies apart from what I like to call contemplation, reflections, thinking about things somewhat intensely. If you call that a hobby, it doesn't really function like a hobby. Like, it doesn't actually take you out from the sorrows of the world. If anything, it sort of plunges you further head on into the problems of this world. And that's different and that's weird. And I had issues, tons and tons of issues, actually just accepting that. Will I ever find a wife? Well, whoever this wife would be is going to want to accept and perhaps even enjoy the fact that I tend to be hyper contemplative about many issues in my life. Statistically, that's not going to be likely. Contemplative thoughts that force you to feel uncomfortable about your current state of life isn't exactly the positive emotion that people generally associate romance with. I'm not saying there is no contemplation in a romantic relationship, but if you put it in terms of a statistical percentage, I would like to think that it's generally not as common or as delightful as it seems. It's necessary because humans need to repent, right? We have baggages and problems we face that we need to turn away from and build our character. So contemplations are necessary, but for myself, they're like a large proportion of the way I approach the world. And that's not something that's common for most people, and that's fine, don't get me wrong. But that's where I started to really berate myself a lot. I start to see myself as an outsider. I start to view myself as basically a second-class citizen, whether as a Singaporean or as a Christian or even as a teacher, right? I start to view myself in the lens that is just unhelpful, I would say. But I really do not have another way to look at it if I'm basing it off statistics, if I'm looking at the people around me and I'm thinking about these things, if you are the minority, you are by definition an outsider of some kind, right? Now, so how do I actually go about this emotion, right? I think we like to say that awareness is the first step. I call it the 0th step, right? In computer science, we start with 0. And awareness is that 0th step. In other words, being able to even use words to describe the kind of weirdness. And in my context, it would be this hyper contemplative nature. Being able to use words to articulate that, that's a huge win. But I do think there are a few more important, necessary follow-ups from that. So after you've recognized your weirdness, I do think the next step is to accept it. Now, accepting it does not mean enjoying this weirdness. To accept the fact that I'm disproportionately contemplative is to accept the fact that I'm probably not going to find a life partner in a short amount of time. That's just the reality. That's just statistics. That's not an issue of human worthiness. It's not an issue of being a man or less of a man. It's just simply statistics. It also means that in general, the friendships I form, the options for friendships that I form are smaller. Like, I don't have that as many options as someone who might form friendships on the basis of something more lighthearted, let's say. I'm nothing against lightheartedness, by the way, right? Really, I think it's great actually. I think it's necessary for all of us. I'm just recognizing it for myself that since what piques my interest is not as lighthearted as it seems, the reality, the statistical reality, is that I'm not going to be able to make friends with most people I meet. And that's fine. But I think that's what it looks like to accept it, right? Accepting it doesn't mean it's a great thing. Accepting it means this is the reality I'm living in, and I'm willing to I'm willing to live with that reality. Right? That's the idea of accepting. Now, once you have recognized your weirdness and you accept your weirdness, that actually leads us to the final part, which is to actually celebrate your weirdness. Sure, it is weird that I'm hyper contemplative, but if it's not for the fact that I'm hyper contemplative, would I be writing my math blogs? Would I be writing a whole series of theology posts that aim to establish Christian things from first principles of logic, reason, and evidence? Which is basically apologetics, by the way. If I was not this hyper contemplative, would I actually carry out such a task? And I think the answer is, on average, well, probably not. But that also means that because of this weirdness, because of this hyper contemplativeness that isn't as common among my peers, I actually can get some things done that not everyone will be able to get done. And that also means that I can bring a unique flavor into our interactions, into our conversations, a new perspective, a new way of looking at things, a new question that just may not crop up in casual conversations. Because of this hyper contemplativeness, I can even use that to actually benefit the interactions that I'm in. And if my goal and my quest of finding a wife is still a thing, then I'm sure that whoever this wife I'm gonna meet, she's going to be someone similar to me in this hyper contemplativeness. Now, that also means that the dating pool is basically not a large one for me, and that's fine. I've accepted that, right? And I decide, hey, why not celebrate that? Why not celebrate the fact that I have this weirdness that brings a new flavor to the world? Sure, maybe I don't have the same accessibility to the pleasures that most of my peers might be able to access, but perhaps that's fine. That's fine. Be weird, because that's some unique flavor. Your weirdness is a unique flavor God has given you to change this world.